SketchUp has an amazing feature called Photo Match that allows you to generate a 3D model directly from a photograph. It's really more of an art than a science, and it doesn't work on all types of images. Photo Match is best used on boxy objects, such as this building. You can also use it to create models of furniture, like a bookcase, a dresser, things that are kind of boxy. Another tip is that you want to photograph it from an angle like this, where you're standing back away from the object and you can kind of capture the whole corner. Photographs that are more like an elevation view don't work very well. So let's get started. I'll switch back to SketchUp and choose Camera, Match New Photo. I'll select the image and click Open. We get this dialog box that allows us to manage the tool set, and we have these unusual interface elements on the screen. There are two parts to this process. In the first part, we'll align the perspective implied in the photograph up to the coordinates of our three-dimensional space. That way, the red, green, blue axes will match up with those implied in the photo. Then we'll create a very simple model composed primarily of boxes that are extruded in different planes. Then we'll go ahead and map some of the pixels from the original photo onto the model to create a texture-mapped model. So let's get down to it. This right here is the origin of three-dimensional space. We'll just move that down to some meaningful point on the geometry, which in this case would be this lower corner. Then I'll go ahead and slide these green bars over onto this side of the building. So we want to capture these lines of perspective that are implied in this reveal, or along the top of the cornice, or along the ground plane. So I'm going to move these handles over and try to match them up with these features. And that's going to change the way that the perspective is working, at least from SketchUp's point of view. So I'm just going to kind of eyeball that, move it over, and I'm going to do the same thing over here. I'm going to move this over, line it up with the corner, and pull that over to the opposite corner. This is going to move over in the same way. And as we do that, we're getting closer and closer to the real perspective implied in this photo. This blue line represents the vertical dimension, the blue axis, and it needs to match up with this corner here, kind of off kilter right now. I need to keep tweaking these handles until we can get that to look better. And it might be necessary to zoom in closer to the pixels to match up these handles a little better. But I think I'm getting pretty close. This yellow line represents the horizon line. Once you have the lines of perspective dialed in pretty well, you should consider the scale. Set the grid spacing over here to a value that makes sense with the photo that you're dealing with. In this case, I set it to 3 feet, because I know that a person is going to fit through this door, and if a 6-foot-tall person walked through the door, their head would probably be right about here. So I want to get 2 of these grid lines to fit in that space. You can scale the grid by dragging up and down on the blue axis. So that's about 6 feet high right there, because it's 2 grid boxes. Okay, I think I'm done. I'll just click Done. And it creates a page up here, which is actually a scene. I can close this window. Now if I orbit out of here, it disappears. I have to click back on the Page button to return to this particular scene. Now I can go ahead and create a box centered at the origin. I want to make it along the green axis. And then I'll push-pull it back. And you can see how it lines up pretty well with the implied perspective in the photo. I'll just orbit over here and pull the box over, and then return to the photo to keep modeling. Again, I'll orbit, pull the top up even higher, pull the side over even more, and return to the photo. I'd like to reopen the Match Photo window because I want to project the textures from the photo onto the surfaces that I'm modeling. So the way this works is you have to select the surface first and then project the textures onto it. I'll select this surface as well and project. I'll close this. Now I can go ahead and model without having to stay in that perspective. I'll just push-pull this down to the top of the cornice line. Now I need to start breaking the box up into smaller pieces. I'll sketch an edge across here and push-pull this down. I'll draw some additional lines here to break the surface and represent this pilaster. Then I'll pull it out a short distance. I'll just delete this little edge here and then go ahead and pull this surface back. I'll draw a line across here and push this back to represent the pilaster. Press B to activate the Paint Bucket tool. Hold down the Command key to get the eyedropper. Click on the pilaster to sample its texture and paint it onto this surface over here. And now to fix the perspective on that texture, right-click and choose Make Unique Texture. Right-click again and go to Texture Position. Use the push pin to stretch the texture over and distort it. Right-click and say Done. Now if we really want to get this right, we're going to have to go into Photoshop and change the pixels in the texture. I'm going to right-click and choose Texture, Edit Texture Image, and then I'll just zoom in here and use the Clone Stamp tool to clone some of the pixels from some other place and paint them in this area. Hold down Option and sample the sky, and paint some of the sky in over here. You can touch things up in Photoshop as much as you need to. Close, save. I can make some geometrical adjustments here just by pushing this back a little bit to cut that off a little cleaner. And so I can proceed in this fashion, alternately adding geometry and then projecting textures and tweaking the textures until you end up with a good-looking photo model. And this is as far as I took the project. As you can see, a very simple 3D model inspired entirely from the photo. This is not the method to use when you want to create a highly detailed model. For that, you'll need measurements. But photo matching remains a great way to create a simple model from nothing more than a picture.